Hi, I'm Natalie Parker, 30 years old, a software developer who's always been the underdog in my family. On a fall evening in Salt Lake City, I walked into the restaurant, my heart racing. It was our annual family dinner, and I knew something was coming. My brother stood up, adjusting his tie, and clicked on a projector. The screen lit up with charts, numbers, and a contract. The rent for the family house is now $8,800 a month, he announced, sliding the contract toward me. If you don't like it, then move out. The room erupted in laughter. My parents, my aunt, my uncle, my cousin, all of them smirking like I was a joke. My father leaned back, chuckling while my mother whispered something to my aunt, her eyes gleaming with amusement. I gripped my glass, my knuckles white, but I didn't say a word. They thought they had me cornered, that I'd sign their ridiculous contract or pack my bags. But they had no idea what I'd been working on for months, the secret I'd kept buried. I looked across the table, my brother's smug grin burning into me, and I smiled faintly. What I did next would leave them all speechless. Have you ever been underestimated by your own family? Share your story in the comments, and let's talk about standing up for yourself. When I was a kid, the house in Salt Lake City was always full of laughter, but none of it was for me. Growing up, I was the odd one out, the quiet girl who preferred tinkering with computers over chasing straight A's. My brother Connor, for years older, was the golden child. He'd stride into the dining room, report card in hand, and my parents would beam like he'd won a Nobel Prize. Another perfect score, my father, Joseph, would say, clapping him on the back. My mother, Linda, would nod, her eyes sparkling with pride. I'd sit there picking at my plate, waiting for my turn to share. But when I did, maybe a coding project I'd spent weeks on, they'd barely look up. "That's nice, Natalie," my mother would say, her voice flat. "But why can't you focus on real schoolwork like your brother?" It started when I was 8. I'd built a simple game on my clunky old PC, a maze where a pixelated cat chased a mouse. I was so proud I dragged my parents to the desk to show them. My father glanced at the screen, then shrugged. "Games won't get you into college," he said. My mother added, "Your brother's already on the honor roll. Try harder." I felt my chest tighten, but I didn't cry. I just nodded and turned off the monitor. Meanwhile, my brother soaked up the praise, smirking as he recounted his latest debate team win or a math competition trophy. He never said anything cruel outright, but his smug glances said enough. I was invisible unless I was being compared, and I always came up short. By 12, I'd stopped trying to impress them. I'd bring home B's, sometimes C's, because I spent my nights coding instead of studying textbooks. My parents didn't hide their disappointment. At family dinners, they'd talk about my brother's future college scholarships, a big career in finance, while I pushed peas around my plate. "Why can't you be more like him?" my father asked once, his voice sharp. I looked up, hoping for a flicker of softness, but his eyes were fixed on my brother, who sat tall, basking in the attention. My mother chimed in. "He's going places, Natalie. You need to step up." My aunt, uncle, and cousin were often there, too, nodding along, their silence louder than words. I felt like a guest in my own home, tolerated but never celebrated. I tried to prove myself in my own way. At 14, I entered a local coding contest, spending weeks perfecting a program that tracked weather patterns. I won third place, a small certificate, and a $50 gift card. I brought it to dinner, thinking maybe this time they'd see me. My brother had just gotten a letter from a prestigious summer program, and the table was buzzing with his news. I slid my certificate across to my mother. She glanced at it, then handed it back. "That's cute," she said. "But third place. Your brother doesn't settle for third." My father didn't even look up. My brother leaned back, arms crossed, a half smile on his face. I stuffed the certificate in my pocket and didn't bring it up again. Those moments piled up, each one a brick in the wall between me and my family. I wasn't jealous of my brother, not exactly. I just wanted to be seen for who I was, not as a failed version of him. Coding was my escape, my way of building something that was mine. Late at night, when the house was quiet, I'd sit at my desk, the glow of the screen my only company, and write lines of code that felt like rebellion. I didn't know it then, but those hours were laying the foundation for something bigger, something that would one day turn their world upside down. I wasn't trying to compete with my brother. I was trying to survive. Every weekend, I drove to my maternal grandma Hazel's small house in the suburbs. It was my escape from the constant comparisons at home, a place where I could breathe. Grandma Hazel wasn't like my parents. She didn't care about report cards or debate trophies. She saw something in me that no one else did. Her living room was cluttered with old tech magazines, stacks of books on startups, and a dusty laptop she'd bought in the early 90s. "This is the future, Natalie," she'd say, tapping the screen. "You're going to build something big." I was 15, awkward and unsure, but her words lit a spark in me. Hazel had a way of making complicated things simple. One Saturday, she sat me down with a cup of peppermint tea and pulled out a notebook. "Let's talk about money," she said, her eyes sharp despite her age. She explained how she'd invested in tech companies back when people thought computers were just a fad. "I put a little in Apple, a little in Microsoft," she told me, showing me her old brokerage statements. Small bets, big returns. I was hooked. She taught me how to read stock charts, spot trends, and think like an entrepreneur. "Don't wait for permission," she said. "Build your own path." I started scribbling ideas for apps, dreaming of startups, while she nodded, never once telling me to focus on real schoolwork like my parents did. By 16, I was spending entire weekends at her place, coding on her ancient laptop. She'd watch me work, asking questions about my projects. One day, I showed her a program I'd built, a simple budgeting app to track expenses. "That's practical," she said, leaning closer. "You could sell something like that." I laughed, thinking she was joking, but her face was serious. She pulled out a book on venture capital and walked me through how startups get funding. "You've got the brain for this, Natalie," she said. "Don't let anyone make you feel small." Those words stuck with me, a shield against the criticism waiting at home. Hazel wasn't just teaching me about tech, she was teaching me about myself. When I turned 17, she took me to a local tech meetup in Salt Lake City. I was nervous, surrounded by adults twice my age, but she introduced me as her partner in crime. I presented my budgeting app to a small group, my voice shaky. To my surprise, they asked questions, took notes, even suggested improvements. Hazel stood in the back, her smile wide. On the drive home, she said, "You don't need their approval, but you've got their attention. Keep going." That night, I felt taller, like I could take on the world. When I was 18, Hazel's health started to fade. She called me over one quiet afternoon, her hands trembling as she handed me a folder. Inside was a letter and paperwork for a trust. "I'm leaving you $300,000, she said, her voice steady despite her frailty. "It's not a fortune, but it's enough to start something. Don't tell your parents or your brother." I froze, the weight of her trust sinking in. She grabbed my hand. "This is your shot, Natalie. Use it to build your future, not theirs." I nodded, promising to keep it secret. She smiled, her eyes bright with pride. Hazel passed away a few months later. I sat in her empty living room, the silence heavy, clutching that folder. Her lessons about tech, about resilience, were more than just advice. They were a blueprint. She'd seen the potential in me that my family ignored, and she'd given me the tools to prove them wrong. I didn't know exactly how I'd use that money yet, but I knew it was my chance to change everything. Hazel's voice echoed in my head, "Build your own path." And that's exactly what I plan to do. After Grandma Hazel passed away, my brother took control of the family house. It was a modern home in the suburbs of Salt Lake City, the same one where I'd spent my childhood dreaming of code. I was 25, still living there, trying to carve out a career as a software developer. But my brother, now 30, saw the house as his domain. He'd always been the golden child, and with Hazel gone, he wasted no time asserting his authority. "This place is an asset," he told me one evening, his voice clipped as he typed on his laptop. "You're lucky to stay here, Natalie, but it's not free," he declared. I'd pay $2,500 a month in rent, a number that felt like a punch to the gut. At first, I thought he was joking. This was our family home, filled with memories of Hazel's laughter and late-night coding sessions. but his face was all business, his eyes cold. He handed me a lease agreement, typed in stiff legal jargon, as if I were a stranger renting an apartment. "Sign it," he said, tapping the paper. I scanned the terms: late fees, maintenance costs, even a clause about upkeeping the property's value. I signed, my hand shaking, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't afford to move out. My freelance gigs were steady, but not enough for a new place in Salt Lake's pricey market. His control tightened over the months. Every first of the month, I'd get an email from him. Subject line: rent due. The tone was always formal, like I was a tenant in some corporate complex. Payment must be received by 5 p.m., he'd write, or penalties will apply. Once, when I was a day late because a client delayed my paycheck, he didn't call or text. Instead, he cut the Wi-Fi. I came home to a dead router, my work laptop useless. When I confronted him, he shrugged. "Rules are rules, Natalie," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Get it together." I felt a surge of anger, my face hot, but I bit my tongue. Arguing wouldn't change him. It wasn't just the rent. He started billing me for repairs, hundreds of dollars for a leaky faucet, then more for a cracked window I hadn't even noticed. "You live here, you pay," he texted when I questioned the charges. I'd send the money, my savings dwindling, each transaction a reminder that this house, once my sanctuary, was now his leverage. I'd walk through the living room, remembering Hazel's voice telling me to build my own path, and feel a knot in my stomach. This was her house, her legacy, and he was turning it into a prison. My parents didn't care. I tried talking to them once, hoping they'd see how unfair this was. "He's just being responsible," my mother said, her tone dismissive. "You should be grateful he's managing things." My father nodded, adding, "He knows what he's doing, Natalie. Trust him." I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded, my jaw tight, and left the conversation. My aunt, uncle, and cousin who'd visit occasionally stayed out of it, their silence siding with my brother. I felt alone, trapped in a house that no longer felt like home. But something shifted in me. Each email, each bill, each cold interaction fueled a quiet resolve. I wasn't going to let him control me forever. Late at night, after paying another of his invoices, I'd sit at my desk, staring at the folder Hazel had given me. Her words echoed, "Don't tell your brother." I started to see a way out, not just from his rules, but from the shadow he'd cast over me. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I was determined to take back what was mine. One late evening, Wendy and I sat in a coffee shop, plotting to change the game. I was 27, tired of my brother's control over the family house, and ready to take back what was mine. Wendy, my best friend since college and a sharp lawyer, leaned across the table, her eyes gleaming with determination. "We're not just fighting for the house, Natalie," she said, scribbling on a napkin. "We're building something bigger." That night, we laid the foundation for Parker Tech, a software development company that would be my ticket to freedom. Starting Parker Tech wasn't easy. I'd been freelancing as a software developer, building apps for small businesses. But my income barely covered my brother's $2,500 rent and his endless repair bills. Wendy helped me file the paperwork to register Parker Tech as an LLC, explaining how it could shield my personal assets. "This is your cover," she said, handing me the official documents. "It'll let you move in the shadows." I used the $300,000 Grandma Hazel left me to fund the startup, carefully transferring the money into a business account. I didn't tell a soul. Not my parents, not my brother, not even my cousin, who occasionally asked how I was holding up under the rent. The first step was building Parker Tech's portfolio. I spent nights coding a project management tool for local startups, something sleek and user-friendly that could compete with bigger platforms. Wendy marketed it, using her network to pitch it to clients in Salt Lake City. By the end of the first year, we had 3 contracts, bringing in steady revenue. I poured every dollar back into the company, living frugally to save as much as possible. I took on extra freelance gigs, coding websites for restaurants and e-commerce stores, often working until dawn. My eyes burned from staring at screens, but each paycheck felt like a step closer to my goal. Wendy had a plan for the house. "We'll buy it through Parker Tech," she said one afternoon, pulling up property records on her laptop. My brother, unaware of my moves, was still managing the house as if it were his personal empire. Wendy found out it was held in a family trust, with my parents technically owning it, but my brother in charge. She contacted a bank, presenting Parker Tech as a thriving business looking to invest in real estate. I was nervous. My savings and Hazel's inheritance weren't enough for the house's full value, nearly $1 million in Salt Lake's booming market. But Wendy negotiated a loan, leveraging Parker Tech's contracts to secure favorable terms. The process was meticulous. I met with the bank under the guise of Parker Tech's CEO, signing documents that listed the LLC as the buyer. Wendy handled the legal side, ensuring every step was airtight. "Your brother won't know until it's done," she assured me, her voice steady. We offered the trust a fair price, and my parents, distracted by their own lives, approved the sale without asking questions. They assumed it was some random investor, not their own daughter. The day the deal closed, I stood in my bedroom, holding the signed contract, my heart pounding. I owned the house, my house. But I kept it secret, continuing to pay rent to my brother like nothing had changed. Hiding the truth was the hardest part. Every month, I sent my brother his $2,500, swallowing my anger as his curt emails arrived. I'd see him at family gatherings, smug as ever, talking about property management like he was some real estate tycoon. My parents nodded along, praising his responsibility, while I stayed quiet, playing the role of the struggling tenant. Wendy was my rock, reminding me why we were doing this. "You're not just taking back the house," she said one night, handing me a coffee. "You're taking back your life." Her words kept me focused, even when I wanted to scream the truth. By the time I turned 30, Parker Tech was growing, and I was ready for the next step. I'd built a company from nothing, turned Hazel's gift into a weapon, and reclaimed the house that held her memory. My brother thought he was in control, but he had no idea what was coming. I wasn't just a tenant anymore. I was the owner, and soon everyone would know. The family dinner at the restaurant turned into an unexpected trial when my brother stood up. I was 30, sitting at the same Salt Lake City restaurant where we'd gathered for years, my stomach tight with anticipation. He adjusted his tie, his face radiating confidence, and clicked on a projector. The screen glowed with charts and numbers, a polished presentation that screamed control. "The rent for the family house is now $8,800 a month," he declared, his voice sharp. He slid a new lease agreement across the table toward me. "If you don't like it, Natalie, then move out." My father chuckled, leaning back in his chair. My mother smirked, whispering to my Aunt Susan, who nodded with amusement. My cousin Ryan and Uncle Gary joined in, their laughter cutting through the air like a blade. I stared at the contract, its pages thick with terms designed to trap me. The room felt smaller, their eyes pinning me down, waiting for me to crumble. My brother stood tall, his smirk daring me to challenge him. But I was done playing their game. I pushed the contract back, my hand steady. "I'm not signing this," I said, my voice calm but firm. The laughter stopped. Joseph raised an eyebrow, his fork frozen in midair. Linda's smile faltered. "What do you mean?" she asked, her tone sharp. I leaned forward, locking eyes with my brother. "You don't own the house," I said, letting the words hang. A murmur rippled through the table, Susan's eyes narrowing, Ryan shifting uncomfortably. My brother's face twitched, but he recovered quickly. "Don't be ridiculous, Natalie," he snapped, pointing to the projector. "This is my property now. Sign the contract or you're out." His voice was loud, commanding, but I caught a flicker of doubt in his eyes. I stood up, matching his height. "You're wrong," I said, my tone even. "I've been paying you rent for years, but I know something you don't." The room went silent, every pair of eyes on me. Joseph set his glass down hard, his face red. Linda's mouth opened, but no words came out. I didn't reveal everything, not yet. I wanted them to squirm. Before my brother could respond, the restaurant door swung open. Wendy walked in, her heels clicking on the floor, a folder in her hand. She was my best friend, my lawyer, and right now my ace. She strode to the table, her expression all business. "Sorry I'm late," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. She opened the folder and placed a document in front of my brother. "This is the deed to the house," she said, her words clear and deliberate. "It's owned by Parker Tech LLC, and Natalie is the sole owner of Parker Tech." The air seemed to vanish from the room. My brother's face drained of color, his hands gripping the table. Joseph sputtered, "What is this nonsense?" Linda's eyes darted between me and Wendy, her composure crumbling. Wendy didn't flinch. She laid out more papers, bank records, transfer agreements, all stamped and notarized. "Natalie purchased the house 2 years ago," she said. "She's been paying rent to keep things quiet, but that ends now." Ryan's jaw dropped, his fork clattering to the plate. Susan and Gary exchanged stunned glances, their earlier amusement gone. My brother tried to speak, his voice. This can't be legal," he stammered, flipping through the papers. Wendy raised an eyebrow. "It's ironclad," she said. "You've been collecting rent on a house you don't own." I watched my family's faces, shock, disbelief, anger. My brother's confidence was gone, his shoulders slumping as he stared at the deed. Joseph pushed his chair back, his face flushed with embarrassment. Linda's hands trembled, her eyes avoiding mine. I felt a rush of triumph, but it was bittersweet. This was the house where Grandma Hazel's voice had urged me to build my own path. And now I had. I looked at my brother, his eyes wide with panic, and said, "You thought you could control me. You were wrong." The words landed like a final verdict, sealing the moment I took back my power. After the dinner, I returned to the house that was now truly mine. The air felt different, lighter, as I walked through the door of the Salt Lake City home where I'd grown up. The revelation at the restaurant had shifted everything. My brother packed his bags a week later, his face tight with humiliation. Without the rent he'd been collecting from me, his financial world unraveled. I heard, through a mutual acquaintance, that he'd taken a smaller apartment downtown, struggling to keep up with his lavish lifestyle. He never reached out, and I didn't expect him to. The bridge between us was burned, and I was okay with that. I got to work on the house. It was more than just a building. It was a piece of Grandma Hazel's legacy, and I wanted it to reflect that. I hired contractors to brighten the space, installing large windows to let in natural light and replacing the outdated furniture with sleek, modern pieces. The living room, once dim and heavy with memories of family dinners where I felt invisible, now had an open layout with a cozy reading nook. I turned the basement into a studio apartment, listing it for rent to local professionals. The income was steady, enough to cover maintenance and then some. Every change I made felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, honoring Hazel's belief in me. My parents, Joseph and Linda, didn't take the news well. They called me a few days after the dinner, their voices a mix of anger and disbelief. "How could you do this behind our backs?" Linda demanded, her tone sharp. Joseph added, "You've humiliated your brother." I listened, my jaw tight, but I didn't argue. I'd spent years trying to win their approval, and I was done. "This is my house now," I said simply, then hung up. They sent a few more texts accusing me of betrayal, but I didn't respond. My Aunt Susan, Uncle Gary, and Cousin Ryan followed their lead, cutting contact after vague apologies that felt more like excuses. I blocked their numbers, drawing a line I'd never thought I could. The silence that followed was strange but freeing. For the first time, I wasn't living under someone else's expectations. I leaned on Wendy, who'd been by my side through it all. We'd meet at the coffee shop where Parker Tech was born, laughing about how far we'd come. The company was thriving, with new contracts for our project management tool pouring in. I hired a small team, mostly young coders like me who'd been overlooked, and we worked out of a rented office downtown. The house, now a rental property, was no longer just a home. It was an asset, just as Connor had once called it, but on my terms. Looking back, I realized how much I'd carried the weight of my family's judgment, the constant comparisons to my brother, the years of feeling less than. Hazel's words had been my anchor, "Build your own path." She'd seen my worth when no one else did, and her gift had given me the chance to prove it. But the real lesson wasn't about the house or the money. It was about knowing my value didn't depend on their approval. I'd spent so long trying to fit into their mold, but breaking free meant setting boundaries, hard ones. Cutting them off wasn't easy, but it was necessary. They'd never see me for who I was, and I wasn't going to wait for them to change. One evening, I stood outside the house, the new windows glowing against the dusk. The street was quiet, the air cool with the promise of fall. I thought about the girl who'd coded in her room, ignored at the dinner table, and the woman I'd become, someone who'd built a company, reclaimed a home, and found her own strength. This story isn't just mine. It's for anyone who's felt unseen, who's been told they're not enough. You don't need validation from those who can't give it. Your worth is yours to define. And sometimes that means walking away. Draw your line, build your path, and don't look back. I didn't. And I've never felt freer.